So here numbers are categorized into two types, integer constant as well as real or floating point or double constant. What is variable? Variables are an identifier and it always denotes the storage location. Character constants are categorized into two types, that is character constant as well as string constant. Hello to all, a warm welcome to my new session on constants, variables and data type. I am Revati from the Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, First Grade College, Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. So dear student, why we want to study constants, variables as well as data types, what's the need, what's the usage, everything we are going to study under this chapter. Now, before going to start this chapter, let me to recall the things what I have discussed in my previous session of this chapter. So, I started with Java virtual machine, that is what is JVM, what is the need of JVM. Along with that, I have covered command line argument. So how to write command line argument and how to pass the input. Along with that, I have covered object oriented programming methodology in Java. So these are the topic I have discussed in my last session of this chapter. But in my today's session, at the beginning, I'm going to deal with what is constants, what is the need of constants, variables, what is data type, in that what is integer type as well as floating point type. So dear student, let's begin with the topic that is constants. So what is constant? So as the name itself indicates that it is fixed value. So constant means what? It is fixed. For example, if I write A equal to 10, this is fixed or constant. The value which is I'm going to store in A, that remains as it is. So here constants in Java refers to fixed value. That means whenever I'm going to get or I'm going to encounter any fixed value, then it is termed as constant, that do not change during the execution of the program. That means if I write A equal to 10, then it does not change during the execution of the program. So here Java supports two different types of constants, that is numeric constant and character constant. So here Java supports two different type of constant, numeric constant as well as the character constant. Now let's see what is numeric constant. So numeric means what? It's nothing but the number. So here numbers are categorized into two types, integer constant as well as real or floating point or double constant. So dear student, here character constants are categorized into two types, that is character constant as well as string constant. So dear student, let me to give some example for integer constant. For example, in my program, if I write int A equal to 100, then this is the example for integer constant. Even in my program, if I write pi equal to 3.1412, then it is example for floating point constant. That means at the beginning itself, I'm going to define the value, and whatever the value I'm going to assign, that remains as it is throughout the program. That means during execution of the program, the values does not change. Now, if I consider character constant, so what is character? What's the size of the character? It is only 1 byte. Now, if I write grade equal to A, then this is example for character constant, and make sure that all the constants are written inside this single quote. Now if I consider constant, then I'm going to create array of string. So it is array of string and I'm going to assign Java. So dear student, this is the example for string constant. Now let me to discuss what is variable. What is variable? Variables are an identifier and it always denotes the storage location. For example, if I write int a, now this a points to the storage location or address of the storage location. So a variable is an identifier that denotes a storage location used to store a data value. Now dear student, let me to write the example here. If I write int number equal to 10, now the 2 bytes of memory is reserved for this number. Now this is the address of this storage location. For example, if I want to access 10, how can I access? With the help of number. So what is this variable here? It always denotes the storage location. So if I consider the storage has address, along with that I can able to have number. So this number is example for an identifier. It always denotes or points to the storage location, and here 10 is stored in this location. Unlike constants that remains unchanged, if I consider constants, then the values are remains as it is. But if I consider variables, the values are going to vary according to the user need. Now the variable may take different values according to the execution of the program. If I consider length and breadth, these two are the example for variables. A variable name can be chosen by the programmer. That means if I want to write the variable name, then who is going to write? Me. That means the programmer. Think that I'm the programmer. Now I'm going to choose the variable name, and while choosing variable name, give some specific value to the variable. So a variable name can be chosen by the programmer in a meaningful way so as to return what its significance in the program. For example, think that if I want to read the length and breadth, then specify the variable name as it is. That indicates that it gives some meaning to the variable. Now, let's see what are the rules followed while defining variables. So while defining variables, we have to follow certain rule like an identifier. So uppercase and lowercase letters are distinct. For example, in my program, if I return number, then I cannot use number because in Java, it is case sensitive. That means it's going to treat uppercase letter as different and lowercase letters are different. It should not be a keyword. That means I cannot able to use keyword to define variables, and no white space are allowed. Example, if I write number 1, then it is wrong. So I cannot give white space between two variables. So I can write number 1. This is the valid one. Then variable name can be of any length. That means while defining any variable, we must follow the variable length. That means give some reasonable length variable name. So these are the rules used to define variables. Now I'm going to have data types. So what is data type? Data types are nothing but the type of the item. I want to identify particular type of item. In that I'm going to use data types. Now data types specifies the size and type of values that can be stored. For example, think that I'm having student name. So what kind of data? It is nothing but the name. That is nothing but the string. So here what is data type? It is mainly used to define particular kind or type of item. The variety of data types available allow the user to select the type. That means based on the user requirement, select the data type. So dear student, in Java, data types are categorized into two types, primitive and non-primitive. So what is primitive? That is the simple and basic data types, and it is called intrinsic. Now, if I consider non-primitive, these data types are derived from the primitive data types. So here, if I consider primitive data type, once again, this basic data type or simple data types are further classified into numeric and non-numeric. And this numeric data type is also further classified into integer as well as floating point. And if I consider non-numeric data type, this is once again categorized into two types, that is character as well as boolean. And if I consider non-primitive, that means I'm going to derive the data type from the basic data type. That means I'm going to create my own data type by using primitive or basic data type. So here it is once again classified into three types, that is classes, arrays as well as interface. What is data type? It's mainly used to identify the type of item or type of data, and it is classified into two types, primitive as well as non-primitive. Now let me to discuss the different type of data one by one. So at the beginning I'm going to have integer. Suppose if I want to define whole number, then I'm going to use integer data type. To represent it as integer, I'm going to use int. Now integer type can be whole number. What is whole number? That is nothing but the complete number. The size of the value that can be stored depends on the integer data type. So, if I consider integer, what is the memory allocated for integer? It is 2 byte. Now, if I consider integer data type, once again it is divided into byte, short, int as well as long, and all three types are used to represent whole number. There's nothing but the integer type. Now let me to consider another type, that is floating point numbers. Now if I consider integer data type, it is capable to store whole number. But if I want to store fractional values, in that time I'm going to use floating point numbers. So then what is the range here? So dear student, now let me to consider one simple example for floating point. If I write float pi equal to 3.1412, then this is the example for floating point. So this is nothing but the fractional values. So here floating point data types are further classified into two types, that is float as well as double. Now if I consider character, This is also example for non-numeric. That means except numbers, I'm going to have character. For example, if I want to write the grade A or B grade or C grade, in that time I'm going to use character data type. And if I'm going to have array of names, once again in that time I'm going to use string. So to make it string, I'm going to write the character within the double quote. And what about boolean? So here boolean is nothing but I'm going to have the true value as well as false to indicate that I'm going to have boolean. Then what about class? Here class is nothing but the blueprint, that is example for user defined data type. Class has its own data members as well as methods. Then what about interface? In Java, we cannot able to implement multi-level inheritance. To achieve that, we are going to have interface. So interface includes abstract variables as well as abstract method. Then what about array here? This is also example for non-primitive data type, and it is a collection of homogeneous element. That means it is capable to hold collection of element, and all the elements are grouped under same name, and all the elements are stored continuously. So it uses continuous memory allocation. And these three are the example for non-primitive data type. So dear student, in my today's class, you got more information about what is constant, what is variable, and what is data type, along with the different types of data type. But in my next session, I'm going to deal with declaration of variables, giving values to the variables, assignment of statement as well as read statement. So dear student, in my today's session, you got more information about what is data type, what is variable, how to define the variable, and constants. Anyway, let's meet in the next session with some more information about variables, constants as well as data types. Until then, keep watching and keep learning. Thank you.